everyone, and thank you for joining us here on the Recruitment Roundup podcast, which is brought to you by BMS Performance. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, BMS Performance is a specialist sales and marketing recruitment consultancy. For the last 30 years, we've been helping businesses across the UK recruit for vacancies at every level. I'm your host, Mike Leather, and every week I'll be joined by a new guest where we'll get stuck into the latest trends in regards to recruitment. We'll talk about insights, we share ideas, we share experiences, and ultimately we look to provide value to fundamentally help you, whether or not you're a hiring manager, a business leader, or part of an internal talent team, to recruit smarter, faster, and more effectively. So welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Recruitment Roundup. I am your host, Mike Leather.
I'm the co-host, Sam Musiarira.
And today we are delighted to be joined by a guest, David Bentham. Really appreciate you coming on with us. And in this conversation, we're going to be covering the following. So hiring at scale. We're going to be talking about incentivising sales professionals through education and progression in order to drive performance. We're going to get David's thoughts on what separates top sales reps from the rest. Really looking forward to getting into it. David, as a way of kicking us off, why don't you introduce yourself, your background, what it is that you do?
Yeah, for sure. Hi everyone. I'm David Bentham. I am currently the VP of go-to-market at DinMo, so I'm running kind of the whole go-to-market function. DinMo is a composable CDP solution, customer data platform. We sell to basically kind of data teams and marketing teams. But previously I worked for Cognism, who people that listen to this might have heard of. I joined that company at seed stage and grew out to kind of, or I left when there was about 700 people. And then before that, a little company called HelloFresh, doing door-to-door sales. So that's my background. Yeah, really good to be here, and thanks for having me on.
David, what is it that you're doing at DinMo at the moment?
So yeah, so I joined about 9 weeks ago. I'm the first sales hire, and basically my job is to create a predictable revenue model for the business. I suppose in layman's terms, what I'm doing is hiring and building a sales team and a marketing team that's suitable for the market that we're going after.
David, how have you found obviously the transition from working such a large big beast such as Cognism and then obviously moving to to DinMo at this stage?
Yeah, I mean it's been fun. I love startups, so I definitely think different people sometimes suit different stages of business. And I think at this stage in my life and where I am right now, like I definitely am preferring kind of being in a small business which like we can really build and grow. I think the big difference is probably fairly obvious. Like I'm wearing many hats. Like before this, I was just building the presentation for a board meeting tomorrow, and 20 minutes before that, I was literally messaging applicants for a RevOps executive role that I've got. Like myself, I blanket threw them all into a BCC and just sent them a blanket email and apologized to keep it simple. And then just before that, I was, I'm managing opportunities. After we went to an event a couple of weeks ago, Big Data London. So I had to pick up the phone and call every single lead myself because I was the only person in the business to do it.
Back on the tools, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's great, and like I've got fortunately I've been hiring recently. I've got a couple of people joining me this month as 360 AEs, and then also a solutions engineer. That'll take some bits off my plate, but by wearing the many hats now, it's also allowing me to kind of be in the trenches a little bit, and when they come, I'm hopefully going to have more to be able to say to them. I'm using it as a moment to test the tech that we're using, to make sure that we have the right tech stack, so that I'm like equipping the sales team the best I possibly can. So yeah, it's it's interesting, but that's, personally for me, I find it really engaging and fun to do it. I don't know how sustainable it is over a number of years, but right now, I can definitely get away with it.
David, looking at your LinkedIn profile, and as someone that runs a sales team myself at Cognizant, we just rewind back to your time there, and this one thing that really struck me, like you scaled the team from 5 to 100 reps. We've been on a fairly big recruitment drive at BMS recently, where we've brought in 7 new people into the team. And I felt at times that my mind's been blown with that, and Sam's probably seen me trying to do everything. So that's just something I'm really curious on. I'd love to learn more about that and what that actual thing was like, because to go from 5 to 100, there's attrition in there as well, isn't it? Right? Not everyone makes it. So the amount of recruitment you probably did is excessive as well. So yeah, I'd love to learn more about what was that experience like, and then we'll go into the process of it.
Well, first it was amazing. I think I always say that the key, so the way that it all happened, I suppose, is like right at the start I tried to set the team up for scale, and also tried to set the team up in a way where when the business is looking at, okay, should I keep growing the team? Is the team doing well? I think the key thing is that they need to understand, so I ran the, maybe contextually just for everybody listening, I ran the SDR team specifically, which is the top of funnel team. They basically do all the cold calling, cold emailing, creating initial opportunities. I basically just needed to make that team really predictable. I mentioned before, like this is what I'm trying to do now at DinMo, but I tried to make that team really predictable, where essentially if someone was to come in, if I was to hire one more person, the business could be fairly confident, and obviously people are different, but like they can be fairly confident on that they know what the output might be. And so that was the really key thing. And so I invested, I suppose, in that mindset like quite early, probably because of my experience at HelloFresh, but invested in creating that system quite early, and from there it was just growing and growing, but it's also it was really interesting. We can obviously dive into this, the different stages and how actually kind of the maths change and the focus changes, and we went from Cognizant has a massive market, so we went from I can just keep adding heads and there's just so much to play with, everybody can get involved, to okay, we really need to start thinking about how many people we can actually physically put in these areas before we're before there's a diminishing return on their output, etc. So and then also team structure, how do we make sure that everybody is receiving the same as the group scales, and then the company brought in RevOps function and a sales enablement function. How does that change the roles of the leaders? So yeah, it was super interesting. There's obviously so much to unpack.
Dave, before we get into the stages, I'm quite interested in terms of where did that idea sort of come from? Because it sounds like it's something that you probably thought of, and you touched on your time at HelloFresh to think this is the right way for a business to grow going forward. Do you want to talk to us a bit about that and where that actually came from? Because maybe not everyone thinks that way.
Yeah, so my entrance into sales was I went backpacking in Australia, and if anybody's done that before, if anybody's done that before, there's kind of a couple of standard jobs the backpackers do. One is your cafe, the hospitality type roles, and then for the people that didn't do any hospitality growing up like me, they and they don't have the CV to back it. You go on Gumtree, and there's a whole host of kind of basically sales roles, and yeah, essentially there was this one for HelloFresh. I didn't realize it was a door-to-door sales job when I turned up, but it turned out to be a door-to-door sales job. It was commission only, and so literally, if I didn't make a sale, I wouldn't make any money. And I moved from I suppose I joined there, you know, like life's a lot about timing, but I joined there when there was a new kind of leader I was based in Melbourne, like in the office that came in, and he'd done it all before, or he'd scaled a door-to-door function out a kind of a competitor for HelloFresh previously, and he really had like a good understanding of how to do it, and I suppose he just kind of like, you know, threw that wisdom at me, and yes, but the learnings, well, everything about running a commission only sales team is all around, okay, how do I get people in who are willing to do the job, because they're no cost, they don't cost us anything, right? So it's how do I attract people into the role, how do I train them, and they're really quickly, because remember, like if they're not making any sales, they don't make any money, so people aren't going to stick around for like, you know, they won't even stick around for a week if they don't make a single sale. So really, like day one that you send them out there and they start hitting doors, they need to be making sales, and then it's retention. It's about, okay, like now I've got these individuals and they're making sales, how do I make sure they keep coming back every day to work? Because I suppose without going into loads of detail, essentially they could leave at any time, as well. So those pillars are really clear in that environment. Like it's how do I hire, how do I attract and hire, how do I train, and how do I retain, create incentives to make sure that they keep coming back every single day. And although you have, you know, like a lot more, I suppose, moving to Cognizant, and people being actual full-time employees and it being kind of like a proper corporate like job, although there's other things that kind of, you know, like employment rights, etc., that cover you much better, the principles are actually largely the same. As well, it's just you know, less extreme, I suppose. So that blessing of fire, that was kind of a blessing of fire, moving to HelloFresh and doing that in that door-to-door environment, as a way of, you know, it gave me a lot of transferable skills that I then that was kind of, I suppose, the inspiration for how we did it at Cognizant.
David, you said you set the team up to scale. Like, what ingredients go into that? What are the things that you look at? How do you set a team up to scale?
Yeah, so it's all about those three pillars that I suppose I just mentioned from the time at HelloFresh. It's like, okay, so how do we attract talent and make sure that we're like hiring the correct talent? The attraction bit, to be honest, in the early days was through recruitment organizations. You know, just like you guys have. So that was, you know, outsourced. But the hiring process itself is all about, you know, making sure that you have a really consistent one where, you know, simple enough that you can do it really rapidly. You're not, I kind of hate, and we could get into this, but I hate hate companies that have super long interview processes, especially for you know, SDR roles, they're grad roles, that, you know, I'm not looking at people with loads of experience. So we had a 2-stage interview process. You did a first one with me and then the second one with the CRO and myself. And yeah, it's super simple. We did it. It was in office every single time. It was exactly the same questions, exactly the same environment. And we essentially had a scorecard that we followed every single time. Then it's the training. I mean, the first step is the onboarding. So it's making sure that you know, like you have a really clear onboarding path. I like kind of onboarding to really cover like a 3-month period. But you know, you can start off with just like, here's the first week. This is exactly what we deliver. We have certain goals along that onboarding period, so to sanity check on how people are performing. Like, for example, like one of the goals was people booking in their first meeting within the first week. If people didn't do that, then that was a flag, not to them but to us internally, of like, okay, we need to do more to support this individual. Like, how can we essentially like, what can we add into the onboarding to make sure they get there? If they didn't do something by the first month, that would be obviously like more extreme. We'd need to step in like heavier, in a heavier way, but generally people did it in the first week. And then it's and then in terms of training, it's the continuous training from there. So it's like, okay, once they've onboarded, what's the what's the pattern of training that we can give to them, like week in, week out, to make sure that they're continuing to grow and learn. And then it's the retention piece, and the retention piece, I suppose, for like a company like Cognitum, or to be honest, any sales organization, in my opinion, is what's their commission plan look like? What's the culture of the organization, right? Is it a fun place to turn? Like, I think that was a really important piece of learning at Cognitum, is like, this is people's like lives, right? This, you spend most of your life at work, right? So like, is it a place that you do just want to turn up to every day because you have a good time, and like it's easy in that respect?
I think especially when you're recruiting at that level as well, when they're generally graduates, maybe first job out of university, a big part of what they want is culture and good environment, don't they? So
yeah, exactly. And then I suppose that leads me nicely onto the last piece, which is that I'm hiring grads. So for them, if I'm hiring the right people, they're super ambitious and they want to grow, right? They don't want to just come in and be an SDR. Like, I hear all the stuff about career SDRs, but I just, like, I don't want to hire people that just want to sit in an SDR role, generally speaking. So I need to give them a really clear promotion path. So it's, for me, like, I mean, there's obviously more, but really the main pillars of incentivization is what's their commission plan, what's their promotion path, and then like, what's the overall culture? Is it one that they're happy to work in?
Yeah, no, great. David, thank you so much for touching on the onboarding and that process. It sounds amazing when it's done right. What would you say would be the challenges, maybe the hardest thing that you found when you were recruiting and looking to grow at scale?
That's a good question. So the recruitment part, I think the biggest challenge we faced was when, I know this is really specific, but to speak directly, we always hired in at like a price that was kind of like a compensation package that was lower than the industry, or for a long time, especially when we were a small organization. For us, like, we kind of, people were joining us mostly because they knew that there was room to grow, as opposed to what the initial like pay looks like. And then in 2020, when COVID happened, obviously one of the impacts was that tech companies absolutely boomed, and a big thing was because everybody was remote, a lot of American companies that have loads of money basically just started like rapidly opening up offices in London, not physical offices, but just hiring people in London because everybody's moving to remote. And so, like, I think we faced really two challenges there at that time, and that was the quality of candidates that we could pick up for what we were offering, and then also just retaining like our internal talent. That was like I think a really difficult moment from a scaling perspective. And then the other one would be when we had the London office, but we actually expanded into like but by the time I left, we had an office in Boston in the US, in Cologne in Germany, and in Paris, France, and actually technically in Sydney as well. So it was, I think that was another a really big challenge for me is when we moved, or we started opening up offices in different countries. It's a whole different game in each country that you're playing. So it was being able to juggle all of that.
What did you learn about what those differences were? Like, if maybe a sales leader's listening to this now and they're in the same boat where they're embarking on recruiting in Europe or in other places in the world, what were some of the key learnings that you found from?
I think the key thing that I learned was that ultimately every place is completely different. So let's take Cologne for example. Cologne is not known as a tech hub. Cognitum made the decision to open up an office there largely because we hired some super experienced sales leaders who were based in Cologne themselves, and so but there's not like a huge like tech environment. I mean, it's not really known for it at all. And the other part of Cologne or Germany in general is actually like the SDR role doesn't really exist. Like culturally, I mean, there are tighter laws on cold outreach in Germany anyway, but culturally it's not really the done thing, is like to do loads of cold outreach. And so, and I think, like, in even in the UK, you don't go to university and want to become a salesperson 9 times out of 10. But I'd say in Germany it's a whole nother extreme. And so we were going to this kind of, like, it's a city, but it's a small city, and we need, like, a real challenge was like working out how do we actually not just say, like, okay, here's an SDR ad and, like, who's interested, because nobody would apply, but how do we go and find these, like, people outside of college, convince them on a job that they've never ever heard about in any capacity, that culturally they probably don't like the sound of in any way, and don't believe in that, because they go home to their parents and ask them about it, and their parents are like, no, why would you ever do that? That's disgusting, right? Cold calling all day. And then and then convince them in, obviously, like, train them up and just, I suppose, battle through all those problems. So whereas when we went to Boston, it's a totally different problem. Like, people actually do graduate from college wanting to become salespeople. They, you posted an SDR job ad up. There's a million SDR. Boston's full of tech companies. In fact, one of the problems we had out there was our biggest competitor was also based, or is also based, in Boston. So we were fighting with them, like, very literally for the same talent. So it's like, we just have to take different approaches, and I think that was kind of like a major learning, and that all starts with, like, okay, what's the candidate attraction design process, like, what do we need to do there to be competitive? What's the interview process? How does the interview process change? In Germany, I was training my sales managers much more on how to sell the job, right? Because, to be honest, like, it got to the stage where, like, almost as long as you had a pulse and you were willing to make a cold call, we'd probably hire you. And then whereas in where we were training our managers in Boston was really about, like, okay, how do we sell our SDR job above other people's SDR jobs? And then, what's the onboarding process look like as well, right? Like, again, like, how do we make sure that we're like, retention, again, and in Germany was way more important because it's so hard to attract talent. So that's one thing I'd say was kind of, like, really important.
Great. David, I've just got a question. Let's talk, obviously, performers, a subject that Mike and I love to talk about, obviously, within our team, and some of the conversations that we have internally and with some of the guests. When you think about, some of the people that you guys have recruited in your past, what were those attributes that you would say that you noticed that people had to become top performers? And perhaps a question to ask, how did you go about perhaps maybe interviewing that, finding that within your interview process, shall we say?
Yeah, so I suppose I've spoken about it a number of times, but I think the key thing for me is there's kind of three things that I look out for. First things first is, like, natural high achievers. I'm hiring kind of generally junior, or in my previous roles, I'm hiring generally junior people with not a lot of work history potentially. So I'm just looking for people that in the past have demonstrated some level of high achievement. It might be education, it might be like sports, it might be, to be honest, you could be the tiddlywink champion of the world. Like, I think that there's a certain mentality that certain people have for just, like, wanting to excel, and it's a really, really good indicator for future performance. And that's what I want when they actually become, part of the team. I want them to be, like, pushing and having that competitive energy, whether it be against other people or themselves that actually don't really care, to just become the best at what they do. I think the second thing is, for me, is curiosity. Again, I want people that are kind of naturally wanting to self-educate. One of the things I actually did in the early days of Cognitum, when I was trying to shift to more of a culture of learning, is I actually stopped making. I made every training session we did optional. I said, look, like, if you just want to make more calls, you can go make more calls. Like, I'm totally fine with that. But if you want to come and do this lesson, let's do it. I had a real cultural problem at the time that there were a lot of people that would like turn up to our training, just like be on their phones or not really care or whatever. So I made it optional. And I remember there was 2 individuals that turned up every single time, and yeah, they became the 2 top performers in the team. And then everybody saw that, and everybody started turning up, and I never had that problem again. But it obviously, like, you want those people that naturally kind of want to learn, want to grow, like don't want to settle. I suppose it's all tied with the high achievement thing. And then also it's a great sales skill as well. You need to be curious about like other people, etc. Third thing would be consistency. You see so many people in general, but definitely it's sellers that like have one great month and then they sit back for the next month and think they're God's gift, and then and they're constantly like up and down. I would much rather have someone that's kind of second place every single month than someone that's first place like once every 6 months, right? But blows it out that once every 6 months. So yeah, like, and that kind of, for me, like goes down to kind of a level of discipline. Are they turning up to work every single day? Are they showing the same level of, like, even if if they've been to Bordeaux, I was just saying, context this is I've just been out in Bordeaux at a wedding, but if they've been to Bordeaux all weekend and they've got back on a late flight on Sunday evening, are they still going to turn up at 8 a.m. the next day? And although they feel bad and maybe they won't be at their absolute peak, are they still just going to get it done? Are they going to make the dials that are required? They're going to send the emails that are required? They're going to chase their follow-ups like as required? And no matter what the circumstances. And then final one would just be accountability. It's people that look inwardly first, see what they can change first before focusing on what the external factors might be. Those are usually the things that I'm looking for. You asked me as well how I
identify. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of ways, and obviously I've given you like 4 different options there, but I'll talk about the high achievement thing. I mentioned obviously. I mentioned obviously it's like, have they demonstrated that in the past? But another way we do it is we actually got and I get people to do presentations in their final stage interviews. The presentations really vary. Like I'm currently doing or I did an AE. I've hired AEs recently for DinMo. The presentation was a lot more like me testing their experience because I'm hiring people with experience. But for SDRs, I actually got them to do a presentation on why me, why sales, and why Cognizant. I wasn't asking like for anything about being an SDR. I was just wanting them to sell themselves, essentially.
Yeah.
But the reason that I did that is, or one of the best things that came out of that is they would turn up and they'd flick on their presentation on the screen, and I would know so much about their character just from the way that the presentation looked and felt. And I wasn't, I'm not looking for a graphic designer, but what I would be looking for is, are there spelling mistakes, right? Because if there are spelling mistakes, there's clearly a lack of attention to detail potentially. And they're writing, the part of their job is writing emails to send to people, right? And following up. So if they can't do a presentation if they can't, make sure that they've spelt checked, there's probably a problem there. We used to love that certain people would turn up and the way that they branded it. So people went, I remember there were people that would really make the effort to make sure that they did it in the colors, the bright, like almost similar to the colors of the branding of Cognizant. Again, like that's an attention to detail thing, which implies that there's someone that just goes that little bit extra every single time. And then just how they prep, like the why Cognizant question is really about their, like, have they gone and done research to really like try and deeply understand, like how far have they gone in terms of making sure they understand the company so they can answer that question really well. And that's again, another really important sales skill is, before you make a call, like I'm a really big believer on one-to-one outreach and personalized outreach. Like, would you go and go that extra mile to make sure you have a really deep understanding of the individual? So that's just one example. I could go through the others if you want, but we could be here all day.
I think it's really interesting, those attributes that you've mentioned are very similar to attributes that we see in our business and top performers and from other sales leaders we speak to, like accountability, consistency, curiosity, just being like natural, like high achieve that you've said. You need all them things, and you've got all the ingredients to be a top performer. So it's just interesting that that's what you were identifying through your interview process. It's similar to what we see in our business. It's similar in other businesses. You said something before, David, that I wanted to pick up on. So you talked about creating predictable like revenue, essentially. I think that's what the terminology was that you used. Correct me if I'm wrong. What went into that? Like, how did you do that? Because I think that's what every sales leader wants, right? If we get someone and we plug them into a job and we give them systems, whatever it might be, then we know they've got a good chance of creating good outcomes, etc. So I'm just curious what went into that.
Yeah, so a predictable revenue model. I mean, there's a whole book on it by a guy who I forget the name of, but who talks about like generally go-to-market strategies. It's a great book, so people should pick it up. And there's also a book by the first sales hire. I think he's the first sales hire at HubSpot, who talks a lot about how like he created a predictable revenue model as well. The long and the short is that like humans are humans, but like it is, in terms of like overall design, it's a strategy to create basically a conveyor belt process that is essentially like I could go and pull anybody off the street and say, look, like sit here, here's this is the playbook, right? This is these are the people that I want you to reach out to. This is the type of person I want you to reach out to. This is what I want you to say to them. This is the tone that I want you to use for them, like when you're speaking to them. If they say this is what you should say back, like and basically, obviously keep building from there. So that's essentially what you're trying to achieve. And because we're working with humans, there's going to be like there's going to be performance gaps, but that's another thing that you really want to work on is, okay, how do I reduce those performance gaps? Obviously, ideally, just get the low performers up to where the top performers are, so that way you've just got this consistent output. But yeah, it's all about, and I don't want people to listen to this and be like, oh my god, I never want to work for Dave Bentham. He makes everybody turns everybody to robots. But what I'm attempting to do is give like a really, really clear structure to how like I know success can happen. And actually my bedrock on that isn't this like micromanagey, like, okay, here's a I want you to make. I'm actually against generally for SDRs, for example, or for sellers in general. I'm against just telling them like go make 150 dials a day, like go make this many emails. Like I'm much more focused on training. Like this is why, like this is when you should make 100 dials. Like you should come in and make 100 dials. But this is also when you should maybe actually focus on making 30 dials. Right, and like that might be more advantageous on that single day for you. This is when you should invest more time on this, like on this particular email, or spend some time recording a LinkedIn video for outreach. It's this type of persona that you should do it, versus like this is where you should just like rinse and repeat as many voice notes as rapidly as possible. So that's what I focus on, which hopefully gives everybody that clear playbook, but in a way that like they're still in complete control of as well.
So it's a lovely little segue, because I was going to go into outreach methods, and I love the fact that you've gone into that, Dave. So I suppose in your opinion, and this is quite subjective, rightly or wrong, what would you say are probably your favorite outreach methods when you think about new business development and SDR type of role? What do you think that's working, that should be done more often in 2024 as an example?
Yes, so I believe in all outreach methods first and foremost. Like I don't have a favorite, and the reason is because number one, I really believe in a multi-channel approach in all situations. Like there are some assumptions you can make on where buyers want to meet us and how they want to act, but also every individual is an individual, and therefore like the best spread bet you can ever make is by having a multi-channel approach to your outreach, and doing a little bit of everything. My belief on where in terms of like what the best outreach method is largely, again, is largely try everything and work out yourself, because it's probably different depending on who your industry is, or your persona is, or like slightly different. However, saying all that, I worked for Cognizant. We sold to salespeople. Salespeople love the phone. No surprises there, right? We also sold to like recruitment teams. Recruitment teams love the phone.
Yeah.
I moved to, today I'm targeting chief data officers, like CTO type characters. I think maybe you'd make an assumption that maybe they wouldn't react to the phone quite as well. Still love the phone, right? But there is differences. Like for example, I've noticed with kind of mid-level managers in data teams, sometimes they don't even have LinkedIn. Like I can't find them on LinkedIn.
Really?
Like I met them at an event, but I can't see them on LinkedIn. Or they've not used, you can see by their LinkedIn profile, they have not used it in like 5-6 years. They've not even touched it. Whereas a salesperson, we know like every single time, they're on LinkedIn every single day, I'm sure, like every single one of them. And so LinkedIn was super powerful when I was working at Cognizant, and also for marketing. I think we targeted marketing as well. So Cognizant was LinkedIn was super powerful at Cognizant, but definitely less so like at my current organization. So I think like generally speaking, I try and do a bit of everything. If I was going to prioritize anything, it would be calling 100%. The reason why calling is so effective is because nobody's doing it. I literally have my mobile number sat on my LinkedIn profile. I joined as the I joined as the VP of. I literally have a bio saying like I'm building a whole go-to-market strategy out. I've just announced that my company's raised 5 million funding, and guess how many calls I've had?
10.
I think I had one. I think I had one since I announced that funding last week, and it was someone that I'm like interviewing, right? So that's why.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah.
What's going wrong? What's going wrong? Like, is it sales leaders just pushing people to use sequences and automation tools? Is it a change in? If you look at like SDRs, a lot of them are grads. Gen Z, we don't speak to each other on the phone anymore. We just WhatsApp, so therefore we can't have conversations with each other.
Yeah.
What do you reckon the reason is behind that? Because
I think it's twofold. Like, I think firstly, it's the fact that it's scary to be. It's against human nature to call someone up, and just get rejected over and over again. Like, it's not actually pleasant. Let's face it. Like, you have to. I know it never hurts anybody. I know, like, but it is a dent to the ego, and I think like you very rapidly build resilience to it. But if I've not made cold calls for like a period of time, like obviously I rejoined DinMo. The first thing I did was get on the phone myself, start cold calling again. But before that, my role just didn't really require it at my last company, because I was kind of like really focused on the strategy. So I hadn't cold called in 6 months. Of course, I was a little bit nervous about the first few calls I was going through. So I definitely have some empathy, but that's why sellers, like, and good sellers that can build their own pipeline, make so much, and then obviously close it, can make so much money, is because like you're already putting yourself in a bucket of people that are willing to make cold calls, etc. I think, to be honest, the second thing is actually sometimes the vision that the probably the CEO of the has for the company, sometimes as well. I think that there's my previous founder 100%, James, my new founder Usama, like they 100%, they're excited about the idea of having like a group of people in the office just like ripping dials and but I have heard through, I do some consultancy work and things like that, there's founders that like are really worried about like, is it going to ruin the market? Like, how are people going to react to this? I think that's actually a lot more common than you think, especially in SaaS, where a lot of the founders are technical individuals as opposed to sales individuals when they found the company.
So worried about like their brand equity in the market, if they've got people just calling, and
I think
they're given they think they're going to get a bad name.
I think so. Yeah. I think, I think so. I like, it's and I think that's why you see the best companies are like the ones that are just doing loads of cold calling. It's interesting. Like for example, I've got my number on my email. There's a very famous document signature company, and I've signed up for a free trial, and they've sent me 3 emails back to back to back saying like, hey, like you would, I'd love to. I'd love to chat to you about like you.
Have their reps looked at your profile as well?
I doubt it, right? I doubt it. And it's like, it's literally. But I wonder whether that actually is like feeds down from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the individual being not, like a salesperson that's not willing to pick up the phone, but sometimes I think it's like from top to bottom, where somewhere along the line, whether it's the CEO or like, or maybe it is just like the person's manager just not willing to or is not pushing people hard enough to go and do it.
Can I ask a question, and Sam, you can come in because I can set you down to come in and ask a question. You said before about there's a right time to make 100 dials and there's a right time to make 30 dials. When's the right time to make 100 and when's the right time to make 30?
Yeah. It's a great question. So, okay, so look, like in principle, or I suppose one of my principles is like, there is diminishing returns on added volume of calls, as in the quality of the call will reduce if you really focus. And what I mean by that is like, say I go and get a power dialer and I focus on getting like 500 calls out in a day, right? What those power dialers are basically just tools for me. I won't have any time to do any research. Like, when you use those things, if you use those things before, they bleep up and they say, okay, suddenly you're on the phone to this person, right? So you're probably going to just have to pump out a generic pitch to them and just hope for the best. Whereas if I was to make one call in a whole day, like, hypothetically, then I could commit my whole time to really thinking and researching like this individual before I made the call. And there's, it's like, I think there's a balance at all times, but essentially like there are two obvious moments where you want to up your call volume. One is when the people that you're reaching out to, it doesn't matter as much if you get it wrong, if you get the call wrong. And there's lots of different examples of where that might happen. One, we used to run a bottom-up approach at my previous company. So we'd call end users. The end users are individual salespeople. There was always 10 individual salespeople for one manager. So like you could rip calls to them and it doesn't really matter because like, like if one of them says no, they're not really important, but it's all for information gathering purposes. So that could be an example. Another example could be if your TAM is massive. So actually, to be honest with you, I'm probably going to get a parallel dialer of some kind for my ease when they start here at DinMo, mostly because like right now our target market is massive, but we only have like a few reps, right? So again, like we're getting a lot of value just from like having those conversations, and we don't really know what the perfect script is because we haven't got to that place of predictability. Whereas on the other side of the fence, the kind of 30 dial moments is when, like maybe it's when calls matter a lot more. Maybe it is like the decision maker you're trying to speak to. Maybe it's someone that has like really high intent because you've spoken to their end users already, and they like, hey, their current provider, and they, you've got all this amazing information, so you want to give them a call. Yeah, or maybe like your TAM is really small, so like maybe you've walked into a business. I was speaking to an AE this weekend who was telling me that like he's walked into a really established like publicly listed organization as an AE. He's been given like a really minuscule book of business to work with. Like let's say you've got 20 God, I don't know, like 40 companies that are kind of like 1,000 to 5,000, and you don't have a lot of decision makers in there. You want to make sure every single conversation counts in that respect. So yeah, I mean, those are some examples, but you can apply really human logic to it all.
I think it's interesting, right? Because at BMS, our team will prospect into different market segments. And like if we look at people like Sam and others in his team who are prospecting decision makers from medical device equipment manufacturers, they could get a pickup rate like 5 calls and they'll get a connect. But I've got another guy in the team who is purely focused on technology businesses, different world. Like you're talking 25 calls to get a pickup sometimes because of the differences in like the market segments and how much those sales leaders will react to different forms of outreach, which goes back to the multi-channel approach. But then when you're sending emails, you've got to be absolutely spot on because you just get that much rubbish coming through. So it's interesting like when you're talking about that, and I agree with everything that you're saying.
Yeah, I mean that example that you gave, like going back to my previous point, in the US we had a connect rate of about 4% ish, whereas in the UK we'd have a connect rate of like 10%. So, you know, obviously to get the same number of conversations as our US sellers, and our US sellers made so many more dials than our UK sellers, just because they need to have the same, like roughly the same amount of conversations. So yeah, it's not as simple. And I really do believe that like a lot of sales managers make the mistake of just saying like, go make 150 dials. And then, you know, like, and that's, I think for me, my approach is really like a really strong education piece to the actual individuals and imparting the wisdom on them to make the decisions themselves on when they need to put their foot on the gas versus when they can when it's the right time to be a bit more strategic.
Really, really good point, David. I suppose you definitely sit within the quality camp, aren't you? Which is great. How important would you then say, David, when you think about an SDR, or I think yourself as well, and you're going back onto the phones, how important is that opener and that tonality? What could a good one sound like if you were to advise anyone within that type of role?
You're on the spot now.
Yeah, that's yeah. Look, the opener is for me. The opener is just about keeping them on the phone. So saying whatever's gonna just keep them, like, just get yourself into the conversation. And there's loads of different ways of doing that, but the most important thing from my experience is doing whatever is really natural to you. Again, a story I've told a few times, but there's this guy that we had called Brad. He was from New Zealand, and he used to do the whole like, hey, it's Brad from Cognitum. If you feel free to, like, this is a cold call. Feel free to shut the window, like shut the phone out the window right now. And he got into every single conversation that way, like every single time he got into conversation. And the reason I mentioned he's from New Zealand, obviously he had a bit of an accent, like I don't know, he's kind of like a naturally like cheeky, chappy kind of guy, and it just worked an absolute dream. So obviously everybody else on the team started picking it up, and they were like, well, Dave, like, I'm not having the same results. And it's because like they were saying the same words, but like, because it was not natural to them, people can hear that and read that, and so the approach didn't work. So look, I'm not going to sit here and rattle through different openers, because it's like, go on Google, go to ChatGPT and say, go and find me 20 cold call openers, and if you're struggling to know what to do, then just try, like, 5 of those out, or your favorite 5. Literally mark down like how many conversations you're getting into them by saying it, not how many you're booking, just how many you're getting in, how many times you're actually continuing the conversation from there, and then stick to the one that's working for you the best. That's the advice I give.
I do agree. I think people overthink the content of the opener, where it's mostly about the tonality. Really, it's how you say what you're saying rather than what you're actually saying. I think for the most part, that's what we've seen in our business, and that's what you're talking about there, essentially, isn't it? You've got to be someone that when you pick up the phone to someone, you actually sound like a person they'd want to engage with, and you're interested, and you've got energy and all the rest of it about you.
100%.
Cool. We're fast approaching the end of this. Could keep talking about all these outreach tactics all day. David, we have a tradition of finishing off these podcasts by asking the guest what their favorite interview question is. Like, what's the one in your repertoire that you'd always ask, doesn't matter what role it is you might be interviewing for, what's the number one interview question?
Yeah, so I'm totally stealing this off my first CRO, Naz McKerban. So if she's listening, this is yours. But she taught me, and I still do it to this day. A really an interview question that I love is I ask, do they have any siblings? And then I hope they have siblings. If they don't, I say like, okay, do you have any cousins, or like someone that's known you for a long time, right? But generally they say yes, and then I go, and like, if I was to go to them and ask to describe you, how would they describe you? And so really, like, the interesting thing about that question is, where in lots of interview questions you just get like the response that they think they want to the interviewer to hear. This one just naturally, I don't know why, maybe some psychologists can tell me, but I don't know why, but naturally, like, their guard completely drops and they actually say the thing that, like, in terms of how their siblings would describe them, which and the insight is really interesting, because obviously these are people that have known them their whole lives, right? So the way that they describe them is like really gives you a clear picture of like the type of person they are overall. And it usually starts something along the lines of, yeah, I mean, the first thing they'll say is, I'm horribly annoying. And then they'll kind of give you a bit of like why they're annoying, and it could be things that are really useful, like, you know, because I'm really competitive and I used to like want to beat them at everything, or you know, they might talk about ambition or something else. But generally you just get like this little bit of insight into the type of character they are, as opposed to whatever just the interview question that they think is right is. So yeah, it's a small one, but I think it's a nice one as well. It's a nice it's a nice disruptor to the boring old interview questions.
What are you excited for in the short to medium term?
Yeah, lots of things at the moment. There's lots of things going on. So recently joined DinMo 9 weeks ago, building a go-to-market function from scratch. Really, really big challenge, but really looking forward to that. I've also I've taken on some advisory roles, and one of them being a company called Second Body. For anybody listening, definitely check out Second Body. It's a platform that really allows you to practice selling and grow as a seller. It uses like AI, conversational intelligence, to do it. I know BMS are also really heavily involved with the organization as well, and customers themselves. So, you know, whether you're an individual contributor or a manager, definitely worth checking it out. What Omid and the team are doing there is just really like revolutionary in terms of you know, making sure that you're in the best place possible to have those sales calls in the future. And I suppose the final thing is just, you know, like I'm always sharing on LinkedIn the things that I'm learning and doing. So if you want to give me a follow, I'm going to share a lot of like kind of what that process for creating a go-to-market strategy from scratch is looking like, all the trials and tribulations of it as well.
Right. Yeah, and we can certainly attest, can't we, Tom, to Second Body? It's been a game changer for us. So yeah, if anyone's curious about that, look into it. But David, thank you very much for this and coming on. We could have genuinely stayed on much longer. Maybe we'll do another one in the future, but we do really appreciate your time and joining us today.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Right. Well, thank you for everyone for listening. Hope you all enjoyed that. It was a great episode, and we will be back next week with another one. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Recruitment Roundup podcast. Thank you very much for listening to the show, to watching the show. We really appreciate your support. It would be absolutely fantastic if you could give us a rating on Apple, on Spotify. Give us a review. Any feedback really helps and is massively appreciated. So thank you once again for joining us, and we will hopefully see you again next week.